Hey everybody, Chris Armiger, Fort Myers Beach Fire. So I wanted to talk to you guys, case study for Module 9. I did Oklahoma City bombing of 95. So my review of the case study is going to be kind of brief, but then the conversation immediately after, stuff, takeaways from this is kind of big. So I'm going to kind of breeze through this. I think this is one that we're probably all pretty familiar with. So in terms of the case study from the text, you're the director of a federal agency tasked with emergency management operations. And then on the April 19th, your agency is deployed to the Murrah building in Oklahoma City where there was a bombing. And like most of the other case studies we've done so far in the text, it starts with, what is your plan of action? What resources do you need at the time? And what other agencies do you need to coordinate with? This one, as far as your objectives and your strategies to deal with this incident, is very much like the one I did last week on the bridge collapses. You have to expand your agent. So first of all, it's a federal building. So that immediately tells you that you're going to have to, if you're the IC, a local IC, if you're somebody in this class, most of us are work for municipalities or local governments or fire districts. So our level, you're immediately going to know, hey, I need to reach out to federal agencies as soon as possible. We should have, or at least our battalion chiefs or our chief officers should have hotline contacts for FBI, DEA, stuff like that, and our, whoever the local responding office is to your jurisdiction. So you're going to get them on the horn immediately because you know that it's going to require, the chain of evidence, the whole response is going to be at a level way beyond what we do in our 24 on 48 off at our level. But in terms of, you're the director of a federal agency, you're going to reach out to other federal agencies. And the big thing for this one, I think, is intel. So when you look at stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 of the disaster in the case study, it builds on, your initial response, and it's structural. You got tons of walking wounded, fleeing the scene. You don't know really where your scene is or how big your scene is. How do you deal with the walking wounded? And then your initial response. Where are you going to put trucks? How are you going to get trucks in and out? How are you going to get responders in and out? Notifying hospitals, getting bed counts, and letting them know that, hey, your bed count's going to explode in about 15 minutes because you're going to have the greens, your MCIs, your greens, your walking woundeds. Anyone who can fly and drive is going to go on their own. They're going to flood the closest hospital, so you need to plan to get people evacuated to hospitals outside your jurisdiction, because you can't stop people walking and driving to the local ERs. There's nothing you can do about that, especially in a short time. Especially in the immediate. And then as it goes on, it talks about how horrific the scene is. You're going to want to do something for your staff. Short work periods, make sure they have access to CISD, make sure they have everything they need, make sure they have the ability to reach out to their family and friends so they can focus on the task, not what's going on outside. That has to do with their responder safety. That's really number one. And then like I said, stage 2, it talks about medical resources, and 3, again, your plan of action and safety, which I all just kind of touched on. So the reason I wanted to kind of breeze through that is, again, not to diminish the case study or to distract from the case study. But so I kind of, secondary to my fire EMS career, I like legal studies, and after I finish this, my plan is to someday try to start applying to law schools. That's a way down the road thing, but I would like to practice law at some point in my life. So I have a lot of interest in legal stuff. And this case study, why I wanted to talk about this one, is there's something that came out of this, and it's called AEDPA, and that is a bill. So in 1996, after this bombing, there was a bill, AEDPA, that came out, and President Clinton signed it in shortly after this event. So what does that do? So if you look at some of the videos I included and some of the reading I included on my post, AEDPA was really what started emergency services, specifically fire, first responders, with expanding our role into these sort of disasters, into like a federal funding resource, training and stuff like that. So what this what this did essentially was this act that was signed into law in '96 initiated our, like I said, our funding for terrorism, for responding to catastrophic incidents that had to do with that were like explosive in nature or terroristic in nature. So that's when we started with all our ICS training. We got funded for hazmat training. You know, pretty much any agency in the country, if they're inclined to do so, can find funding for hazmat and can find funding for ICS training. And in fact, it's a requirement under law under this AEDPA bill. And it's an anti-terrorism act. It's anti-terrorism protection act of '96. I'd have to look it up. It's just not, as I'm speaking to you, I just can't remember what it is. But it's all in my references and other sites I sorted for this post. But anyway, so there's other parts of that bill. So every bill is good and bad, right? Any bill that they put through Congress, there's several hundreds of pages. And so why I wanted to talk about this with the case study is, you know, there's always a reaction to incidents, especially catastrophic incidents like this one. Killed almost 200 people, I think 168 dead, hundreds and hundreds of injured. It involved several buildings. You know, it had the Murrah building was the target and took the worst of it, but there were, I think, 16 other buildings involved. So, you know, in the case study, you want to, some of the takeaways, you know, you want to activate USAR for structural stuff, like I mentioned last time, and other federal agencies. Before I forget, go on about AEDPA. The other thing, too, is in this case study, they never talked about secondary detonations or secondary explosives or tertiary explosives. And one of the things I wanted to mention, so if you're IC and you're responding to something like this, that takeaway from me, again, from this case study and all the reading I did with it, is this took out a daycare, which was on the lower levels, right? So this person involved in this bombing had no sense of conscience about hurting children or endangering children. I can't imagine they would have a sense of conscience about hurting first responders. So just something to put in the back of your mind. If you were ever to respond to an incident that targets people, and it sounds kind of like contradictory, but targets people, you know, without targeting any one person, it's just a blanket attack on whomever may be in the area. That should be kind of a red flag to look for secondary devices, especially for responders, just to keep your people safe and to get the incident contained. But to get back to my takeaway from this, so either way, you have the bombing, and then you have this act that was pushed through Congress, and some of the things that come from this act that are relevant even today are, so the get is you get the implied perception of preparedness. Hey, we have to push this act through FEMA and the Department of Justice and all these other agencies. So we'll provide funding. Everybody likes it because there's money for agencies, money coming in for different agencies. So everybody's a yes. Hey, I get more money. Great. And all I have to do is some ICS classes, do some training, maybe have a hazmat truck for my department. Awesome. And people, the general population, they're like, great, you know, the first 50 pages of the bill is all good stuff. You're going to get. But then there's other parts of it when you read deep into the bill, and it's not on the first couple of pages, that are takeaways. So there's always a give and a take. And some of the takeaways are the issue with habeas corpus. So your habeas, just like to touch on it super briefly, I included a video. That's essentially like how long, so if you're accused of a crime, the habeas part of law is how long that you can be detained, when you can be detained, with or without charges, and your opportunity to see a judge or a magistrate or have a jury trial. It's essentially how long you can be detained without either being charged with a crime and then, you know, have a bond set, or how long can you be detained for an investigation if it's determined to be terrorism. So this is important, this AEDPA, because, and it comes as a direct result from the Oklahoma City bombing, because the next step in this is the Patriot Act that happens after the World Trade Center attacks. So you have this habeas stuff that is built into this bill, and it's sold as terrorism. But what a lot of people don't realize when you talk about terrorism is not everyone, most people assume that it has to do with international terrorism or foreign terrorism. But terrorism is almost always referred to, at least in law, blanketly, and there's usually not a distinction between foreign and domestic terrorism. So if you happen to be, or if your crime happens to be considered terrorism for whatever reason, it's a whole new ballgame for you or whomever else is involved. And all of those things are fine and great if the person's guilty and there's no, it's just, it's black and white. But God forbid you were to be somebody convicted of a crime or have a family member convicted of a crime, and the crime be considered to have anything to do with terrorism. If you're a citizen, domestic terrorism, you've really stacked the deck against you in terms of your rights being infringed upon. I'll say infringed upon, if you don't understand kind of what's going on. And then the other part of this that we see today too with this act that's relevant to what's going on today is terrorism, is immigration. So, if you immigrate into the States legally or illegally and you commit a crime, this AEDPA, this act, is really what gives teeth to them detaining you as a terrorist and then moving to have you removed from the country or extradited to your country of citizenship based on someone's interpretation of your motivation for your criminal act, and it doesn't really distinguish between severities of crimes. So you can be a habitual offender for parking tickets or having your license suspended because of parking tickets or something benign like that. And if you are not a naturalized citizen, you can be, in theory, under this AEDPA, removed, from the country after your detention, because of this determination of verbiage related to your crimes. So it's a super interesting topic, but to wrap it up, because I'm 13 minutes in, is like, in these case studies, there's a lot to learn beyond ICS and stuff like that. There's major changes in the world that we live in that come from them. And I think this case study, above all, with the exception of the World Trade Centers because of the Patriot Act, is an outstanding example of how a singular event can change the course of history in terms of politics for generations. So watch some of those videos. Let me know what you think, and I'll watch yours. And have a great weekend. Bye, guys.